Have you ever worried about global warming? Have you wondered about when climate change started to be recognised and how it could affect us all? And closer to home, have you sold a house recently or had a property to let? Then you'll have had an energy performance certificate. Are you building a house? You'll know that the building regulations insist on plenty of insulation. These energy efficiency measures, which are now part of everyday life, had their origins in the new city of Milton Keynes as a result of a collaboration that started in the 1970s between two organisations, the Open University and the Milton Keynes Development Corporation, and two individuals, an academic and an architect engineering graduate. This is the story of what happened. First, the academic. Peter Chapman, who everybody knows as Jake, got a first-class honours degree in physics and a PhD from Cambridge. Whilst there, he was encouraged by Stephen and Hilary Rose to set up a Cambridge branch of the British Society for Social Responsibility in Science, an organisation they'd set up a few years earlier.
The British Society for Social Responsibility in Science. Now, it just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it? But I was quite attracted to the idea of science being not just something that was done in laboratories, but to actually help people live their ordinary lives. We had our inaugural meeting, as one does as a student society. The room was packed. I was amazed. Everybody else liked the idea as well. But all the speakers that I had got were about biological things. So at the end, somebody said to me, "You're a physicist. What's this got to do with physics?" And I have no idea where the words came from. I said, "It's energy." He said, "Oh, all right." And I thought, well, I better do something. So I started to read books on energy. And I read this book by a famous physicist who was at the time was promoting nuclear energy was going to be so abundant and so cheap that we could have a nuclear reactor in every town. And then the next sentence hit me like a ton of bricks. He said we could produce so much energy, we could equal the amount of energy we get from the sun. Hello. Sun's energy coming into Earth keeps it warm. Double the amount of energy, it's going to get warmer. Oh. And from that time onwards, I thought, I've got to explore this. I started to understand where energy came from and all that sort of stuff. So, and I published an article in New Scientist about a couple of articles. The essential thing was, you can't release more heat on the surface of the Earth than about 1% of what we get from the sun without wrecking our climate. So if there's a limit on how much energy we use, we've got to think carefully about how we use it.
At Cambridge, Jake's work was research-based, but he was interested in teaching. In 1970, he joined the Open University as a lecturer in physics.
Even though I was wanting to focus mostly on teaching, as an academic, I was expected to carry on doing some research. And so when I started to think, well, what can I do? I thought, I know, I'll start an energy research group. And I started it in 1972. Now, the gods have been very kind to me, because in 1973, all hell broke loose. The OPEC, the oil price rises, 3-day working week, miners threatening to strike. Everybody was suddenly interested in energy. Who knows about energy? Oh, this weird guy at the Open University with a big beard has just started a thing called the Energy Research Group. I started to have people almost offering me research grants to look into, if there's a limit on the amount of energy we can use, then let's figure out how to use it more effectively.
Quite honestly, I just don't think that energy reserves are sufficient to allow demand to continue to increase in the way that we've experienced it, say, since from 1950 up to 1973. I think the point is that in that period, from 50 to 73, we were able to increase the demand for fuels because we were exploiting a continuous set of new resources. But now the time is coming when the new resources available to us are more difficult to come by, more expensive, more costly, more difficult to exploit. And I don't think that they will sustain that same historical growth in demand.
It was probably in 73 that somebody from Penguin Books, Gerald Leach, I even remember his name, he was interested in energy as well, and he knew something about what I was doing. And he said, look, Penguin might be interested in a book. He was one of their commissioning editors. And so I said, okay, I'll think up something. And over the year of 1974, I pretty well did the research that underlay Fuels Paradise, that was then published in 1975, which is exactly 50 years ago.
The Fuels Paradise was one of the motivating reasons, I guess, why I was keen to come to the Open University. It was an exceptional book. It brought a completely new perspective for some people on how you thought about the problem of energy.
I explained in some depth that there was a limit to energy use on the planet. And it was one of the first times it had been written in a public, in a general understandable way, not in a New Scientist article or not in some magazine, but here it is in a book.
Meanwhile, at the Development Corporation, a new architect had joined in 1971. Fresh from working for Richard Rogers and being involved in designing a radical house for Rogers' parents, John Doggett joins the corporation's industry group and designs the prototype for advanced factory units with its infamous all-yellow interior. But John had other interests.
We were looking for a simpler life, people being off-grid. That was then leading to, yes, but how do I heat myself? How do I get hot water? All those things. And so I seemed to be the person when this was going to happen, I was in the right place and was known for being interested in this sort of thing. So I worked directly for the Deputy General Manager, was Don Ritson, who was keen on this stuff.
I would add I had one extra department, which was known, I think, amongst the architects as the Department of Silly Ideas. And this is where people who had ideas that were, I think the modern phrase is thinking outside the box, but that's what they were doing. They would come along and say, why can't we do this? And I would try and back them or promote them in some way, which is how we got the Buddhist monks to come and build the Peace Pagoda. Because it came out of the silly ideas. Lots of silly ideas didn't take off, but the Energy Conservation Unit did.
Other organisations in the corporation could ask for advice on something. But one of the first ones came in, part of the problem was that the corporation was using a lot of oil for heating its building at Wavendon. I think we might have proposed it, that we do an energy survey on the buildings. And what we discovered said that if we did certain things, we could save a lot of money. One of them was to insulate the building. But there were other things about the running of the boilers. We did the work, and it had a payback of 18 months, it turned out. And that was startling. So it put us in tremendously good stead with everybody else, because we were half believed before we started. Then it went into another one, which was buy insulation cheap. The government was running a training course for unemployed kids. We said, well, we could use them to install this stuff. They were draft stripping and insulation and cylinder jackets and insulation in the loft. It was good for everybody, and we worked out that it would save something like £150,000.
Whilst Jake Chapman was working with his energy research group and writing Fuels Paradise, the Development Corporation had an approach from the Regent Street Polytechnic.
We were approached by a Professor Chocolat from one of the universities in London, and he got a grant from the EU to see whether at our latitude a house could be heated, not just for hot water for domestic use, but to actually provide heating from solar energy. Now he asked if he would finance it all and put everything back afterwards, so that was fine. And we took a house on Bradville that was a monopitch roof facing south.
I got a call from Don Ritson, and basically he said, we'd like you to be the tenant of the solar house, which was to be opened at Easter 1975. They wanted a corporation and employee family because they wanted to be able to arrange visits to the solar house. The bread and butter of it was a coach tour stopping at the end of the road and people gawping at the solar panels.
The house that was chosen was particularly suitable because at Bradwell there was a monopitch roof system which had twice the area facing south as a dual pitch one, so you could put an awful lot of panels on it.
And they were actually refrigeration panels. Nothing like a solar panel existed in those days, so the nearest they could get, a flattish panel that they could run water through, was a refrigeration panel. They painted them black, and that's your collector. It was heating water. The wardrobe spaces were taken up with 1,000 gallons of water storage in vast steel boxes.
After a lot of tinkering, it worked pretty successfully. I think 60% of the heating was provided by the solar panels. So in that respect, it was successful.
Back at the Open University, Jake Chapman is looking at ways to turn the theories he wrote about in Fuels Paradise into practical action.
Before I finished my work with the Energy Research Group, I had started a very fruitful collaboration with the Milton Keynes Development Corporation. It suddenly seemed to me obvious. Here's a new town being built on my doorstep. How about talking to them about ways of trying to improve the efficiency of the houses they're building? The director of Milton Keynes Development Corporation, a man called Fred Roche, he noticed half of all the visitors to Milton Keynes, remember Milton Keynes is still mostly grass fields, came to look at the solar house. Oh, there's something in this. Maybe if we built more solar houses, we'd... So he was really open to the idea of energy being important. That, obviously, 1973 had made it very clear, and they were building a city that didn't have any regard for energy use at that time. I went to a dinner with the Dean of Science, a man called Mike Pence, and there was only one other person present at the dinner. It was Fred Roche. I'd never met him before. I didn't even know who he was. Then I was invited to go and see him in his office, and he said, "Would you like to come and work for the Development Corporation?" And I said, "Well, actually, no, I'd prefer to stay an academic." He said, "I thought you'd say that." So he said, "How about working part-time?" I said, "Fine." And then that was the beginning of the collaboration that I had with John Doggett and all the other... There were some very good planning directors there that I interacted with over a number of years.
With the linkage with the Open University, things which have been done really for almost off-piste stuff become something that we had to take this seriously.
And we started to develop projects. We'd think of something like, well, could we build passive solar houses in Milton Keynes? It was an architecturally good idea at the time. And so between us, I think it was between us, we cooked up a scheme. Now, John would do all the architectural stuff and say, well, the houses would have to be south-facing, there would be this size, we'd do a whole estate and da-di-da-di-da. And I would help by say, well, we can get support from this government department. Here's how to write a research proposal. Here's the arguments for getting the money out of them. And here's what we would need to monitor in order to prove our case.
Their first big collaboration was the Pennyland estate.
The whole estate was facing south plus or minus 40. The question that then arose was, how far away do you put houses from each other? Because if you put them too close, one house overshadows another according to the height. There was a guy called Bob Everett. He did the work of calculating at what distance away the buildings could be to lose, I think, 10% and then 20% of its energy according to various heights, 1-story, 2-story, 3-story. So the old people's housing was single-story, could go nearer to the ones that were 2-story, and the 3-story had to be well back.
It's a good story. So there were 2 houses estates. One had insulation, passive solar design, low energy boilers. This was built standard building regs, right? And we monitored them both. What it turned out, the energy consumption here was less than half of the standard building rate, less than half. The extra cost of building the houses were about 200 quid. The annual savings were 150 quid a year. This was mind-blowing. However, when we looked at the data, we discovered it had nothing to do with passive solar. And the reason was, these great big open windows, people put net curtains up. And the net curtains pushed the sunlight back, so they weren't passive solar houses anymore. But what made the difference was the insulation and the lightweight boiler. And nobody knew that it could do that. For 200 quid, you could halve the running costs of a house. The people at the building research establishment paid a lot of notice to this result. So this is the sort of, that was how we collaborated. John was always doing the architecture and feeding it through the Development Corporation, and I was doing the data collection, what we had to do, how to make the research application and stuff like that. And it was very productive, very productive.
At the same time as Pennyland was happening, a further project started at Great Linford.
There was another small estate that was also used to look at houses not in large numbers, but individual houses, to see how they worked, in great detail. Where did the energy flow through? Did it go? How much did it actually go through the walls? How much did it go through the floor? How much did it go through the roof? How much with ventilation? And the Open University did all that.
The hard data gathered from Linford and Pennyland led to the corporation upping the standards it expected from its house builders.
They insisted on buildings being built better than to the building regulations, and that was an innovation, that a local area could decide to build buildings at a better quality level than the national standard. The Development Corporation were the first organisation to in effect utilise Jake's energy rating system to set better standards.
For John, change was afoot in 1981.
I was wanting to increase the size of my unit, and a guy came up called David Tarrant, and I was showing him around and saying, at the end of it, I said, David, I'd like to offer you a job here. And David looked at me and he said, John, I came up to ask me if I could offer you a job, which is join me in running energy conscious design office. So we do architecture with energy as a part of the conscious design of it. It sort of led me to think, well, look, I might have done as much as I can do here. I didn't want to leave completely. So I negotiated. I would spend, particularly in the first year or two, I'd spend a couple of days a week in doing Milton Keynes stuff and 3 days a week in London, or the other way round.
One very significant project that John got involved with in Milton Keynes in 1981 is very relevant to our story. Homeworld 81 was a housing exhibition of 36 houses with the aim of demonstrating new trends and technologies in housing and showing what houses might look like in the year 2000. John and his colleagues at Energy Conscious Design were invited to design one of the houses.
It's a house designed and built under the auspices of the Money Programme. We're calling it Future Home 2000. Very much a house of the future, but incorporating all the most advanced technology that industry has to offer right here and now.
We were very keen indeed to promote the idea that we were using far too much energy and that we had to cut it down.
As you may remember, we hope that our house will be able to save 60% of all fuel bills. Yet at the same time, it has to be a compact family house.
There were other things that the house had, for instance, that were new. A thing called double glazing. We all think that's all normal now, but 40 years ago, it wasn't very well known, and certainly not the one that we used on Homeworld, which makes it much, much more efficient. We did something with the controls. You know, we're all used to button controls now, but there were no button controls in those days. But a whole lot of other things in the house, which just weren't around at that time, were there. For instance, there were low energy lights there. People had tungsten bulbs Now they don't. Some of the things didn't happen in 20 years are only just happening in 40 years, like the Home Office. The idea that you didn't have to go to work every day in order to do work, that was an idea that we floated then. That's something that even after 20 years, after the 2000, had not arrived in any way.
Meanwhile, at the Open University, Jake is developing software.
The then head of the systems department had a budget surplus, and Apple II computers, these little things, had just come out. And he said, I'm going to buy some. Anybody want one? I said, yeah, I'll have one. And I thought it was fascinating, and I learned how to program it. It was very, very primitive. But you could now put in data and estimate the running cost for the house, how much it would use for heating, how much for hot water, how much for electricity use. Okay. 1983, I started a business with one of my ex-research students. We called it Energy Advisory Services. And the idea was we were going to give the best advice that was available about how you could insulate your house or improve the energy efficiency of your house. We got better and better at refining this program. And the reason why we got better was because of all the data we collected in Milton Keynes. We knew from the data in Milton Keynes that a house of this size used this much energy, a house of this size used this much energy. So we were able to calibrate the program against the data from Milton Keynes. And we had a portable computer. Well, you had to be pretty strong. It was called an Osborne. It was about the size of a suitcase. And it weighed at least 20, 30 kilos. You wouldn't want to carry it upstairs too often. The screen was this big. The keyboard was built in, and it had 2 floppy disk drives. But we could run a program on it. And the software was developed to make it easy to do an audit of somebody's house. And in front of them, we would show them, we're putting in the data, how many windows you got, how much wall insulation and all the rest. And look, it said that your fuel bill is £850 a year. Is that about right? And do you know what? Most of the time they say, that's amazing, that's right. So now they know that we know what we're talking about. And I say, okay, so watch what happens when I put 200 mil of extra loft into it. Your fuel bill goes down to £700. Is that worth it? They're sold. They trusted the output because it tallies with their fuel bills. Change the loft insulation. They can see the savings they're going to make. Thank you very much. Job done. There were people willing to buy the software. There were a lot more people willing to buy the software than householders interested in paying 100 quid for an audit. But when somebody's phoned up and said, can I buy a copy of the program you've got? Oh, how much would you be prepared to pay for it? 500 quid. Oh, okay. So now I'm starting to realise that there's a business here to be had with the software rather than with the advice. The architects at Milton Keynes, they paid attention to what they learnt themselves when they were using the software more than us telling them. So selling the software could also accomplish my goal of having more energy efficient houses.
A new key figure now enters our story. Steve Fuller was a member of the Milton Keynes Development Corporation's planning department. His work was crucial in making the Development Corporation's senior management and board aware of the initiatives in energy efficiency that had been taking place and how they might be exploited by the corporation.
I'd always been interested in the environment, and interested in energy in terms of as part of a sort of environmental issue that led on to worrying about climate change and biodiversity and all that. And I wanted to get involved in something tangible that followed my interests rather than sitting back in corporate planning in the back room. And sitting down with a good mate of mine called John Doggett, he began telling me about these isolated initiatives, passive solar, penny lands, and all these projects that he'd been working up with the Open University. And I thought, Milton Keynes has got a lot of these projects going. I said, John, why don't I, with your help, actually produce a report called Energy Projects in Milton Keynes?
The reaction to Steve's report was very positive.
So I was sent off to the States to talk to the government people and look at various projects to see if any capitalized on our experience. And I came up in Minneapolis, St. Paul, with a project called the Energy Park. By now, I was quite familiar with government demonstration projects. I said, why doesn't Milton Keynes designate an area calling the Energy Park?
The headline-grabbing part of the Energy Park was Energy World, a demonstration project promoted by the Development Corporation of 50 low-energy houses, which opened in 1986, and Steve was made the project coordinator.
There were a number of architects who were very interested in solar energy, who had links with developers, and they managed to persuade the developers that it was something worth getting involved in.
And John said, we could use this program for vetting the houses who want to build an energy world. We could find out how good they are. Oh, right. What a good idea. So I then started to figure out what sort of metric, how are you going to measure, what measure are you going to use? And after a lot of humming and ahhing, it became obvious what's going to interest people is the cost of running this house. So what we were going to do, we were going to develop a metric based upon the running costs for the house. And we developed a thing called the Milton Keynes Energy Cost Index. This was used to vet the houses going into Energy World. Now here comes a big lesson for me. Because suddenly architects want to get hold of the program. They want to test their design before they submit it, right? So the architects are now learning how to use this program. And you know, I and John and lots of other people have been haranguing architects, put more insulation in, use better heating systems, use control systems, to no effect. They said, bugger off, we know how to build houses better than you do. And they do, of course. However, once they started to use this program, putting a conservatory on only saves 1%. If I change the boiler, it changes 13%. Oh, and if I put loft in, another 10%. So they learnt by using the program what John and I have been trying to bash into their heads for years. And that's a really important lesson. People find out for themselves and then they do it.
Mrs. Thatcher came to do the official opening of the Energy Park, and we were sitting down to lunch afterwards, and she said, you see, you've got things right in Milton Keynes. I mean, here you have this example of a public body which is providing all these opportunities for the private sector to do what we've seen today. And I said, yes. I said, but actually we're doing a bit more than that. She said, such as? I said, well, the development you've seen today at Energy World is there because through pilot projects which demonstrated that they would work, we have demonstrated to private house builders that you can indeed improve insulation standards and reduce energy consumption in housing and still sell the houses. I said, once through pilot schemes we'd shown that, the private developers came in. Without that earlier demonstration, who knows? Oh.
After Energy World, the Development Corporation received inquiries from a number of housing developers to have an indicator like the Milton Keynes Energy Cost Index to apply to their houses, to demonstrate their energy efficiency to buyers.
Development Corporation and I strongly advocated it, said, look, Development Corporation isn't in this business. What it should set up is a charitable agency that could actually develop the programs, train assessors, but they were independent assessors. We got Mary Archer to be chair of the National Energy Foundation. And we had this lovely situation, for instance, these academics from the OU in t-shirts and jeans, suddenly turning up wearing suits because they realized that there's a business opportunity here.
The National Energy Foundation was interested in this software and developing it into what they were going to run as the National Home Energy Rating Scheme. So I was going to become a software supplier to the National Energy Foundation. The development of energy ratings for houses was quite a significant change. And what was really significant about it was that everybody involved accepted it. Up until then, there'd been fierce arguments about what was the most efficient fuel for using. Was it gas or electricity or whatever? And so the gas industry, the electricity industry, NHBC, BRE, the Building Research Lab, they all accepted this bit of software that I produced as being pucker. They all believed the outputs. And that was a major milestone, because now suddenly there was a way of measuring the energy performance of any dwelling in the United Kingdom. Now, the National Energy Foundation is a charity. There's a limit to what a charity is allowed to do legitimately, commercially. As this National Home Energy Rating Scheme got more and more successful, they realised they couldn't carry on owning it entirely and running it, because that would counteract that it wasn't appropriate for a charity. So I said, I'll buy it off you. So there wasn't any money exchange. We did a share swap. I became part owner of the National Home Energy Rating Scheme. The National Energy Foundation was a part owner. And together we formed a company called National Energy Services, which I became the Chief Executive Officer for, the Managing Director. So Energy Advisory Services bought the NHER scheme and became National Energy Services. And that happened in 1994. The model that we had got, which was really widely recognised as working extremely well, we could predict the energy performance of houses really well by now. And we could also tell you whether you had going to have condensation in it. There was all sorts of stuff. It was widely used in the UK. And of course, the more widely used something is, the more people say, well, could you do this as well? Or there's a bug here. So we would have to fix things. And that would require more programmers and a bit more sales. And yeah, it was a proper business.
Whilst the principle of energy rating homes was widely accepted, to what extent were the lessons learned being translated into updated building regulations? In insulation, for example.
I wanted to know the answer to that as well. And part of what I learned was that for sustainable change, it's got to go slowly. If the building regulations had been changed, bang, like that, and the builders have been told, you've got to put cavity wall insulation, you've got to put double glazing in, you've got to put this level of loss in, they wouldn't have been able to do it competently. Their workforce was not up for it. They didn't know how to do it. They had to learn. And for a whole workforce to learn how to build houses differently takes decades, not years. So that was part of it. There's also the political inertia. The house builders are going to, oh, well, if you're going to tell me how to build houses, I'm going to put less money into the Conservative Party, aren't I? And this is how the world works. So there are loads and loads of pressures and changes. Sustainable change has to happen slowly. If you try and make change happen too quickly, it will fall over at some point. It just takes time. But when it happens, it's permanent. That's the other thing. Now, builders know how to put floor insulation in. They know how to put cavity insulation in so that the house doesn't get damp. And the important thing is, when you're building a house, you want it to last for 60 years, maybe 100 years. You don't want it to fall over because you put the cavity wall insulation in wrong and the wall is now crumbling because it got all wet. So you have to think that there are other factors other than just this cost effectiveness and energy.
In 2001, Jake Chapman took early retirement from his job as Professor of Energy at the Open University and his job as CEO of National Energy Services. He went on to be a consultant promoting a different way of public policy making based on systems theory, working for a wide range of clients, including the Cabinet Office, the Welsh Government, Metropolitan Police and the National School of Government. After being acquired by Kingfisher plc in 2011 and a management buyout in 2016, the company name was changed from National Energy Services to SAVA. The company today sees its purpose as to create innovative qualifications and software that empower people and organisations to make a positive impact towards making buildings better. A purpose that founder Jake had as well. After leaving the Development Corporation, John Doggett continued working for Energy Conscious Design, heading the environmental design of 2 of the houses at Energy World and developing BREEAM, the Building Research Establishment Environmental Assessment Method, the first national environmental assessment method for buildings in the world. In 2007, John set up Super Homes with the aim of spreading awareness of how existing household CO2 emissions could be reduced by at least 60%, even in hard-to-treat homes, and to inspire other homeowners to act. In 2014, Super Homes became part of the National Energy Foundation. Some 50 years ago, a collaboration began in Milton Keynes between 2 organisations, Milton Keynes Development Corporation and the Open University, and 2 individuals, Jake Chapman and John Doggett, which was groundbreaking in so many ways.
It was relatively unusual in those days for that type of collaboration to work, because traditionally academics want to be in their ivory towers and do the things that they want to do and don't want to be constrained by the real world. But I think Jake and John as well understood the importance of bringing together the academic and the practical. Both sides were prepared to understand the value of the real world and the academic world collaborating together.
The experience of being involved in this pioneering work made a lasting impression on others too.
I think simply the act of setting up the Energy Research Group had a knock-on impact. So, I set up the UCL's Energy Institute, which is probably now the biggest energy institute in the UK. I wouldn't have done that had Jake not set up the Energy Research Group. Many of the people who were at the Energy Research Group then went on to establish other things. Pete Warne, who worked with Jake and then set up his own company actually delivering energy efficient buildings. Lots of people went and spent some time at ECD working with John Doggett. So I think there is a lot of alumni from the original Energy Research Group that then went on to do quite significant pieces of work elsewhere.
Mark Barrett is also at UCL, where he is Professor of Energy and Environmental System Modelling, and Professor Nigel Mortimer was former Chair of Sustainable Energy Development at Sheffield Hallam University. The tools that were developed in Milton Keynes have had a profound and lasting effect on energy conservation and building standards, not just in the UK, but all over Europe and further afield. More than 50 exemplars of low-energy houses were built and displayed in 2 widely publicised exhibitions. Together with a large housing estate and several houses for sale, these houses were extensively monitored and the data used to confirm and improve energy estimation accuracy, both in the UK and abroad, and show that energy saving was incredibly cost-effective.
The energy rating system has now become the main policy tool for the UK government. They want to bring all the houses up to a C rating by 2035. So if we didn't have that rating, you couldn't have that type of policy for existing homes, and you wouldn't know how to police it. The definition of fuel poverty, which has been a policy aim in the UK to eradicate fuel poverty. The tool started to get used for that because the tool calculates how much energy to maintain comfortable conditions you would need to spend, how much money you would need to spend on that energy.
We're living in a world where the effects of climate change are going to be dominating our future, and solutions to deal with it will become ever more important. The journey that began 50 years ago in Milton Keynes, from the 1970s onwards, laid the foundations for these solutions. It's led to an energy rating scheme that is at the core of government policy to address the issue. It has dramatically improved the energy efficiency of new build housing, and it has inspired academics and architects to devote their life's work to lessening our demand for energy. Milton Keynes can justifiably claim to be Energy Capital UK.
All the things I've talked about, I feel really good about, because they were fun. Every one of those was fun. You know, that's a lot of density of fun, really. And the speed and density of fun, because we were making decisions at a hell of a quick rate. That was a very youngish person. That is wonderful.
The energy performance certificate that now everybody who lets a house, leases a house, buys a house, sells a house, has to have, was a version of the software that I wrote. So when I started the EAS, the Energy Advisory Service, somebody came to me and said, what's the ambition for your business? And I said, to get 1 million homes energy rated. He said, well, what about money? I said, no, my ambition is to get 1 million homes energy rated. And while we were running the National Home Energy Rating, we were totting up how many homes have we energy rated. And we were getting close to 1 million. It's mostly through the NHBC. But of course, with the EPC, that's the energy performance, every bloody house in England that's ever been on the market has got an energy rating on it. Thank you very much, job done.